Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Gandel, President and CEO of Education Strategy Group, a mission-focused organization that helps institutions across the country try to increase educational attainment and expand economic opportunity. I'm really pleased you could join us today for the next webinar in a series that ESG has been putting on with the Association of Community College Trustees and the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, SHEO. And I'd like to thank the leaders of those two organizations, Noah Brown of ACCT and Rob Anderson of SHEO, for their collaboration in this effort. Our three organizations for the last several months have been acutely aware of the unbelievable stress and pressure that higher education systems and institutions have been under, and frankly continue to face due to the COVID pandemic, especially the health and safety challenges and the economic challenges that have compounded the difficult work that higher education needs to do, and the important role that we think higher education must play in the economic recovery of our regions, our states, and our country. So we put this series together several months back to try to elevate the most important issues that post-secondary institutions are facing or will face as they look around the corner to the fall. Previous webinars focused on issues such as better understanding the shifting labor market, trying to address pipeline leaks from terms of traditional students coming from high school to college, and concerns about losing students in terms of enrollment and even summer learning loss being compounded. Contingency planning for fall reopenings, and also how to support an upskilling of adults who need to seek retraining and are out of work. All of these topics have been well received. We really appreciate the input and the feedback we've been getting along the way from leaders across the country that have been participating, and we continue to seek that feedback as we plan for additional topics. Today's topic is very important. We've heard a lot of interest in it across the country, and it's how to plan for and navigate enrollment shifts in higher education. Enrollment always being a really important topic, obviously, and concern and priority for post-secondary systems and institutions. And today, given the economic challenges that students and families and adults face as a result of the pandemic, we're all expecting things to get shaken up and significant changes to occur in enrollment across the country. We're hearing that many traditional students may defer or cancel their plans to enroll or change the institutions they intend to enroll in. And we also expect and assume that institutions will see an influx of displaced workers returning to upskill. These shifts also occur at a time when we know that higher education is going to be financially strapped with state budgets and local budgets taking a big hit. We understand the pressures that higher education institutions are going to be under, try to absorb some of that hit, and how leaders are trying to balance the economics of this with the importance of serving students, both traditional and adults, to make sure they can be successful in this challenging time. So we're very pleased today to be joined by three panelists who have a lot of experience and depth in this work. Obviously, this is new to everyone, this particular situation, but we're really eager to draw on their experience and their leadership in the conversation we're about to have today. So first, Will Del Pilar, the Vice President of Higher Education Policy and Practice at the Education Trust, a very prominent organization and partner of ours who's fighting for improving the conditions in both K-12 and higher education for traditionally underserved students. We're eager to hear Will's views on this topic. Also, Lee Lambert, the Chancellor of Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona, in the Pima region. I think there are 5 campuses and a very large institution right at the center of gravity of obviously a lot of what's going on right now with COVID and the issues around recovery. And then third, Devinder Malhotra is the Chancellor of Minnesota State, the state of Minnesota, with 30 plus institutions that are part of that state system in Minnesota. So we're eager to have the national perspective, someone who leads a large state system, and somebody who leads a large and robust community college system at the regional level joining us today. And the majority of our time will be spent in conversation. And then we'll also be welcoming questions that folks can pose via the Q&A feature of the Zoom. So feel free along the way to go into the Q&A and submit questions. We have one of our team members curating those questions, and we'll be trying to get to some of them in the latter half of the webinar. We probably won't be able to get through all the questions, but we'll do our best to cover as much ground as possible. Also, just for those who aren't yet fully experts on Zoom, I think pretty much we all are, if you set your settings to gallery view, you'll be able to see all of the 4 of us at once as we're engaging in the conversation. And also, just to note that we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available after the session for those of you who want it or want to share it with colleagues. And those of you who are avid on social media users, you can use the Making a Comeback hashtag if you do decide to tweet, and we appreciate anything you want to do to promote the ideas and the content here. So with that, I want to jump right into a conversation with Lee, Devinder, and Will and get them in the game here. So first question I want to pose is a general one. At the beginning, a few months ago, the pandemic, there was widespread alarm about potential precipitous drops in higher education enrollment. There were surveys done, there was data showing perhaps as many as 20% of students who would have otherwise considered going to post-secondary were changing their plans, possibly not going at all, and certainly making changes in types of institutions they would attend, possibly staying closer to home or switching from a 4-year to a 2-year institution. And there have been a lot of data along the way that shows there continues to be a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, but that's really changing and shifting. And we think that each of you probably has a unique perspective on what the data is showing right now. So for each of you, how are you analyzing potential enrollment trends and shifts for the upcoming academic year? What are you seeing from your perspectives right now as the likely scenarios and trends, again, at the national level, institutional level, and state level? Happy for any of you to start. I know that I'd be happy to start maybe with Lee and Devinder, thinking of it from the ground up, and then let Will maybe comment on what he and Ed Trust are seeing and hearing and concerned about at the national level.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be part of this very prestigious panel of folks. So let me first talk about some of the factors that or indicators we look at to kind of help us through this very unprecedented set of times. So we're monitoring unemployment, especially in our Tucson MSA area, as well as we've been monitoring the birth dearth that was happening pre-COVID, high school numbers, as well as what's happening at the University of Arizona. So when I take all of that together, right now, what we're seeing is probably or somewhere around a 20% drop off in enrollment. I was recently in a conversation, and that number was validated, meaning that it's not just what's happening at Pima Community College. This is happening throughout the state of Arizona. And so remember, unemployment usually correlates very nicely with jumps in enrollment if it's too high. But what's interesting, at least through recent data that we have, is the state of Arizona's unemployment, comparatively speaking to the rest of the nation, is low. We're sitting at about 8.7% as a state. When you look at the Tucson MSA, we're about 8.4%. So I'm competing against job opportunities out there. So I'm not probably going to see that large influx of students coming in. And then the University of Arizona is very, very worried about the fact that almost half of their student body is out of state, as well as international mixed into that number. And so they don't know what that number is going to look like. And then we get a bleed over from a number of students that go there. That's why that's an important variable for us. And then, as I mentioned, the birth dearth is a thing that's been happening in our state, and particularly in Pima County. So it's very concerning as high school numbers, K-12 numbers have been dropping off, that also has been putting pressure. All of this pre-COVID. So COVID, we were hoping maybe it would give us a boost, but that's not happening. One last thing I'll mention, Pima Online is really our fastest growing area of the college coming up to the crisis, and it continues to be. It's my only positive growth. When I disaggregate data, cybersecurity program is up, as well as our teacher education program. Teacher education is an online program, by the way.
Wow, thank you. Fascinating, interesting to hear that your unemployment numbers are so much lower than perhaps others around the country, when we're also hearing that Arizona is in one of the biggest hot spots right now for the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves in the weeks and months ahead. Let me shift to Devinder and for the Minnesota system. What are you seeing? What are your expectations?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Glad to be part of the panel. Minnesota State Colleges and Universities is a system of 37 institutions, 30 colleges, 2-year colleges, and 7 universities. And again, at the beginning of the pandemic, as you pointed out, the expectation was that there would be substantial declines in enrollment. In fact, when we set up our budget scenarios, we were dealing with 5, 10, and 20%. And we went to 20% because that was within the realm of possibility. But as Lee alluded to, one thing which pandemic has done is it makes the existing models of enrollment prediction somewhat outdated, because they are based on past will continue into the future. And here there is a very sharp discontinuity with the past. However, we ran some Monte Carlo studies and other things at our system level. And our best guess was, when we took into account changes in personal disposable income and changes in unemployment, that for fall semester, we would settle somewhere around 7 to 8% decline. That's yet to be seen, whether we get there or not. However, summer was very, very hopeful for us. In summer, overall, for all our 37 institutions, our enrollments went up by about 4.9%. And that was somewhat of a surprise. Because most of our classes, and this may go back to also what Lee alluded to, most of our classes in summer, except for few career and technical education programs, were online. However, the universities fared a lot better. 5 of the 7 universities had increased enrollments in summer. 12 of the 30 colleges had increased enrollments in summer. Our graduate enrollments went up by 11.5%. That might also be some of the unemployment online effect. And our undergraduate enrollment went up by about 4%. So overall, about 4.9%. One thing which works in summer also is that if people, in times of uncertainty, people don't want to make a long-term commitment, and our summer classes are scheduled in 5 weeks block, and so that may have helped in bringing more students into the fold. In fall, as of this week, we are running behind point to point as compared to last year at this point. We are behind by about 9.9%. And however, you have to view that 6 weeks ago, that number was close to 30%. So within 6 weeks, it has dropped from about 30% to about 9.9%, and we have still more time to go. The graduate enrollment, even at this point in time, point-to-point comparison from last year, is up by 5.4%. The undergraduate enrollment is down by 10.5%. 2 of our universities at the current time are showing increases in enrollment as compared to last year at this point. 6 of the 7 universities are showing increases in their graduate enrollment. Our colleges are almost everybody is down except for 2 colleges, which are showing point-to-point slight increases as compared to last year. But as I said, we still have 6 weeks to go. And what has happened is we also recognize that pandemic has an impact on psyche, has an impact on the economy and unemployment, but it also disrupts the registration, the advising, the usual communication cycles. So everything is being front-loaded because of that disruption, because students were not thinking of enrolling at that point, which they normally may be in March, April, May. So we expect a flurry of activity, which will come towards the end of July and August, as it becomes more and more real that colleges and universities would be open. And so we are hoping, since we are at currently around 9.9, that our earlier prediction of enrollment settling somewhere around 7 to 8% decline, that's the basis on which we set up our budget formulations, that we will probably hit, and most importantly, improve on that budget assumption of 7 to 8% decline, because we are currently around 10%.
Wow, thank you. That incredibly helpful data, and just a reminder of how dynamic I think the situation is, that 6 weeks ago you thought it was going to be 30%, now you're in the single digits, and to your point, you may have to wait to the last minute to really know it. I guess it puts a premium on being flexible and dynamic in preparing for the student body, right? Which is a challenge. We'll come back to that. Let me turn to Will, just get your perspective, Will, from the national level from Ed Trust.
Yeah, I think Devinder is absolutely right. All the models that we currently have around enrollment, around MELT, around student behavior, we should probably just throw out the window, just because we really don't know on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis how a global pandemic and a recession will impact student enrollment decisions. We do know from some of the data, though, nationally, that students' post-college, high school choices are changing. You know, there was some research done by the University of Southern California that showed that they asked if students' post-high school plans had changed, and it was almost 43% of students said yes. And so what we're seeing is this incredible shift, I think, in student decision-making around post-secondary choices or options. Among the students who said they were switching their plans, almost 38% said they were switching to an option closer to home. 32% said they were moving to a less expensive option. I think the most concerning is 43% said they were postponing plans. This is, critical, especially for low-income students and students of color who don't traditionally have the luxury of taking a gap year. And if they take that time off, they're less likely to ever return to post-secondary. And so, with 43% of students postponing plans because of uncertainty about the modality of instruction, uncertainty about moving away, uncertainty about what the fall is going to look like, I think, there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done to ensure that we're reaching those students who may have been right on the edge previously, and as a result of this pandemic have been pushed over the edge because of maybe a loss of employment for family members, or some direct impact by the pandemic itself. And so what we're seeing nationally is that students are changing their plans, and those plans can vary from opting to a closer, less expensive option, but also postponing those plans. And so I think there's a significant amount of work to be done to try and ensure that we're letting students know that there are still post-secondary options, even if it may not have been the option they originally anticipated.
Yeah, Matt, one thing I would like to add is that even though when you look at the system level or the state level, the averages paint one picture, but the old adage that a statistician drowned in a lake with an average depth of 2 feet, that there is considerable variability among institutions. So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, well said. And to Will, to your point about equity and traditionally underrepresented populations, I'd love to stay on that point for a minute. with all three of you, and just because clearly the pandemic in general is hitting those populations harder, health-wise and in their pocketbooks, and we're seeing that greater concern of potentially dropping or stopping out as well, right at a time when that added educational credential is probably so important to staying in the evolving economy and being relevant. So I guess my question for all three of you is, what are you seeing or hearing, or what steps are you taking to try to combat that and protect against the most vulnerable student populations sort of opting out or dropping out of higher education? Are there any specific strategies you're adopting or you've seen others adopt that you could put on the table for us today?
Well, I'd be glad to start out on this. So just give you a kind of a context for Pima. We are a majority minority college. 46% of our students are Latinx, and then you add in the other people of color populations, it takes us well in above 50%. So I say that because there's also another reality inherent in that. Most of that population is low income disadvantaged. And then when you take what's happening right now, the digital divide has become very, very apparent. When you could come to our campuses, you could use our computer labs. Well, now you don't have access to our campuses, but you also don't have access to the technology tools at home, whether it be the actual hardware or connection to the internet. And so that just compounds the problem. So what we've been focused on is trying to do what we can to address the digital divide. So that's been a big part of our investment. We took our CARES Act money and dispersed it rapidly in terms of the first phase to the students. And then the second phase of that disbursement, we dedicated about half of that. We received just less than $10 million to go out and purchase more technology tools to put in the hands of students. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do. The other thing is trying to better understand where the students are and how can we meet them where they are. What we're learning is a number of our faculty, and I really want to say this, our faculty did a tremendous job transforming and transitioning into what we call a virtual environment. We distinguish that from the online environment. And the quality and all of that is a lot different on Pima Online, which is far better quality, et cetera. So our students are telling us through our surveying that they're not having optimal experiences in the virtual environment. So then you add that into the fact that we probably aren't going to be able to open up our face-to-face programming or even hybrid programming come the fall. And so we know we're challenged. So we're trying to make phone calls, do a lot of outreach, use the social media. We're going to start showing students what it's really like to be in that virtual environment, so they don't all feel like it's this negative type of experience, but they can actually feel it, experience it ahead of time, and realize it's not as bad. We're going to probably do more synchronous pieces now, because that's some of the data is telling us that that students still prefer some of that real-time experience. So do those lectures and the conversations in real time, even though it's in a virtual context. So those are some of the things we're doing.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. Devinder, Will?
Sure. Just along the lines which Lee mentioned, Minnesota State is also a very diverse system. It's a large and a diverse system. We have about 240,000 students enrolled for credit across our system, but out of which 63,000 come from communities of color or those of Native origin, close to 47,000 first-generation students. And then we have close to about 77,000 low-income students, who are Pell eligible. And so the pandemic really magnified the historic inequities which exist both in access as well as in student success, to the point which Lee made. Obviously, one thing which as we moved to the virtual environment, which Lee was referring to, we moved close to 20,000 courses, which were face-to-face online within a span of 2 weeks. We also moved all our student services in a virtual environment. However, that did very little for students who didn't have digital access. Either they didn't have access to internet, or they didn't have the right amount of technology. So most of our, almost all of our colleges and universities worked very hard in making additional investments in providing those students, those who needed additional equipment, and also all through the, excuse me, all through the stay-at-home order, we kept our colleges and universities open so that students who didn't have access could access our computer labs with appropriate safety protocols in place. We also created, many of our colleges and universities created Wi-Fi hotspots that if students were not comfortable coming in, they could drive to the parking lot, sit in the parking lot in the car and do their work. But even those efforts, I think, fell short because many of these students just did not function very well in that environment, as Lee alluded to. The other element, which also was magnified, is that our students who come, they have incredible amount of basic need deficits, and whether they are housing insecurities, food insecurities. And so almost all of our institutions, in fact, I think all our institutions have, like, for example, food pantries where students can go and pick up food. And so we kept all of those services open. We ramped up both our on-site as well as online services for mental health issues, because there was a spike in anxiety and those elements too. And then the most important element was communications. And we impressed upon our colleges and universities, and I think our colleges and universities did a phenomenal job in keeping in touch with all these students who were enrolled in spring semester and bringing them across the finish line and giving them all the information they needed through various ways. And in that, I would commend our faculty and our staff, and also that they got involved. And at the course level, at the program level, they started contacting students and dealing with them. So those are some of the ways in which we try to mitigate some of the impact which increase the historic inequities which our students face.
Thank you for very concrete examples. And I know you've made a system-wide, pre-COVID, you had made a system-wide priority of closing equity gaps. So I know this is really important to you. Will, anything else, anything you want to add that you're seeing in terms of strategies on this?
Yeah, I'll just say that, we historically underfund the institutions that enroll the most low-income students and students of color in this country. And so the students who attend the post-secondary institutions that are serving the most the students of color and low-income students are also those institutions that are most poorly funded. And so the way that they were impacted by a switch to online was also disproportionate to these populations. I have a daughter who attends a historically Black college, and they did not give everyone a Zoom account. They had to use the public version. So after 40 minutes, everyone who was on that Zoom would get kicked out, and then they would have to log back in to finish the course. I know someone who went to an Ivy League college, and they automatically gave everyone access to the Cadillac version of Zoom. So the access that institutions have to bring to bear also impact the experience that students would have once those type of transitions were made. I think Devinder is absolutely right. Around the access piece, you move 20,000 courses online, that's amazing. But if you have 5,000 students who don't have a computer or internet access, and then have you really created access for them, or have you effectively left them out of the type of education again? And so I would say that the impact we've seen has been disproportionate. There are some colleges, I would kind of highlight SUNY Albany here, because they didn't, the type of communication that folks are using, I think also makes a difference. We know that from the research that advising advising makes a difference. But if all we're doing is sending student email and they're not responding to emails, they're not logging in, they may not have access, they may have to work. And then that type of communication isn't going to work. SUNY Albany, though, reached out to students who hadn't logged into a course, who hadn't responded to an email. And what they ended up doing was directly communicating with one-on-one with an actual person with students. They finding those students who didn't have access and sending them hotspots. They ended up taking their computers out of the libraries and sending them to students so they can complete the coursework. And so I think that type of direct intervention is critical when you have students who may, feel that the place that's safest for them is on campus. They can no longer be there. They don't have the same access to computer, to internet, all of the things that you need to be successful in the classroom, and taking those concrete steps to ensure that they have access to participate in a course, I think is critical, especially if this is going to be the modality that we're going to deliver instruction kind of moving forward.
You know, Matt, to Will's point, I think one thing which became very obvious to us during the pandemic was that in general, when you're dealing with students who come from historically oppressed and marginalized populations, you have to individualize, personalize, and customize these services for them, because they require very different kinds of services, and they may need different sets of information. And that element of personalization and customization became even more important during the pandemic. And that's why the SUNY Albany example, many of our colleges and universities did the same thing. The direct intervention became very, very successful, because these were precisely the kind of students who didn't have access to email or didn't have an easy access digital to the digital information outlets.
Thank you very, very much. Really helpful to hear those tactics and be reminded of them. Let me move, by the way, while I'm asking another question or two, I do want to encourage anyone who wants to pose a question who's participating in the audience, feel free to go to the Q&A bar or button and type any question you like, and we're gonna, in a few minutes, turn to some of those questions. I want to go to something you've each referenced a bit, and we all know is true, which is that the expectation that there will be more adults coming to try to upskill or reskill those who have been affected economically. I'd like to get a sense of what strategies you're seeing or you're deploying in your own systems and institutions to reach out to this group, maybe encourage them to come back and upskill and reskill and help them understand the opportunities that are there, and even change your delivery models to be more accessible and appropriate for returning adult students at this particular time. I'd love to hear some thoughts on that. Lee?
So I think, again, we have to remember pre-COVID what was happening, because those same forces that were driving change are still at play right now. So what do I mean by that? So I just recently, you saw a piece that I had published in the CC Times where I talked about the 4 superpowers. That is still the case now. In fact, it's probably even more pronounced now than it was going into the crisis. So the 4 superpowers for the audience, that's artificial intelligence, mobile technology, cloud computing, and the Internet of Things. So we've been using that to re-examine the relevancy of our programs, to start to make them more relevant to the learner. And that becomes important because as we need to reach more of that working adult population, because that's the largest segment of opportunity, at least in our community, probably for a lot of communities throughout the country, you got to have relevant programming. You get the relevant programming by working with the employers and making sure what you're wanting to do aligns with what they're looking for in terms of their employees. So we've been doing a lot of work around those superpowers, working with business and industry, and we've launched what we call our centers of excellence. And that's a recalibration of a lot of our programming to be in alignment with what's going on in our community. So I used the example earlier of cybersecurity. No surprise. Why is that program growing when we're in the midst of a pandemic? Well, because there's opportunity in cybersecurity, and much of that can be done online. So now I can leverage the power of that. We also just introduced Google IT certification into the mix. And so we're very hopeful that's going to also grow in partnership with Google and JFF as part of that collaboration. And that's a statewide effort, by the way. And so and then even in our aviation program, seems counterintuitive right now that you would want to go through an aviation training program when all these planes are grounded. Well, what we're finding in our area is people aren't losing jobs who happen to be working on the airplanes. Why? If the airplane is grounded, someone still has to come out and maintain it. Someone's got to turn it on every now and then. So who are those folks? Those are these maintenance individuals that we train for. So I would say to all of my colleagues, the workforce mission is more important now than ever. The technology is driving the changes associated with those programs. Don't divest from those programs. Make sure you're investing, but they're current and relevant to Industry 4.0 and the key partnerships that are going to allow you to leverage those opportunities. So I think those are just some of the pieces I would share.
Yeah, really helpful. And so the future of work is now, and was what you're saying, but got to be nimble and understand the dynamics at play right now with the COVID recovery as well. Lee, will you just state those 4 superpower indicators again, or sectors again, as someone was asking online on the webinar? So
if you type in 4 superpowers, Pat Gilson wrote an article about them. And so they are artificial intelligence, mobile technology, cloud computing, and the Internet of Things. Just so people know, with AI is machine learning, big data, robotics. AI gives rise to a family of opportunities.
Right. Big categories with some specific occupations and things within them. That's helpful. Devinder, were you trying to jump in on this?
Yeah, sure. I think as Lee pointed out, business partnerships are very important, and all our colleges and universities have built over the years very strong, robust partnerships, because they not only add, as Lee pointed out, a greater relevancy quotient to our programming, but it also enables us to serve our students over the life cycle of the individual. And so through customized training, through continuing education, we have gone in and provided the skills needed through our business partnerships. And we also partner with state government and workforce centers. And so those who are unemployed, they can come back too. So there are various ways in which we capture them, maybe initially in a non-credit environment, but then provide a linkage through either competency assessments or other ways from that non-credit to the credit one. And then I think the other piece which I would mention is that this would also need, these students would also need some additional support. So with the help of our legislature, this year we have created close to 2,500 workforce development scholarships. And they may go up to almost 4,000 this year. And they are aimed at 5 high demand sectors of healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing, agriculture, and elementary education. And so these are the various ways we do it. But I think the most critical element in engaging the adult student would be, what is the nature of this recovery which is impending? Is it V-shaped or is it U-shaped? Because if it is V-shaped, then it will require a different set of strategies, smaller modules, customized trainings, because the workers will going back to work very quickly. But if it is U-shaped, then we are in a traditional recession mode, and so we can draw upon some of our earlier strategies in order to attract and retain and help and upskill and reskill a lot of the adult workers.
Thank you. Really interesting dual kind of approach to thinking about that. Of course, we have to wait and see.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the strategies you both also put on the table there. And there are other states we've heard doing similar grants to incentivize adults to go into certain pathways and earn certain credentials that are labor market sensitive. And they're kind of tweaking that as they go. So I'm glad you raised that strategy. Will, anything you want to add on the adult population?
Yeah, I was just going to say Strata has done a lot of good work in terms of surveying adult students or adults recently who are considering going back to school. And I think both Lee and Devinder are absolutely right that the majority of respondents are looking for certificate, certification, licensure, these more short-term programs to try and either upskill or gain a skill to improve their employment, or to gain a skill to enter some type of employment category. And so I would say we do see the majority of adults looking at those type of programs. From my perspective, it is critical for thinking about equity, because we know that a lot of those programs do not have the return on investment that a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree have over the long term. And so I think it's critical for colleges to build programs that are stackable. And so if it's a shorter term licensure, that it leads to some other program or certificate that students can accumulate credit towards an associate degree. So I would say, that's critical. Strata in that same survey also looked at what the obstacles that these adults effectively considered in terms of returning to school. And the number one concern for the adults was time/logistics. How do I do this if I have a job? And so ensuring that there's flexibility and when these programs are offered, our students can do them online, I think is critical. The second major issue with students was self-doubt. They question their academic competence in terms of being able to complete these programs. And so one of the only ways to really address that is through advising and counseling, checking in with students, ensuring that they continue to plug away at the class or get the resources they need to be able to graduate. The third was costs. And so, affordability continues to be and will be, I think, a concern for students, especially adult students moving forward. And so I think it's something we need to address. I want to quickly say something that the City College of Chicago just did announce to try and get returning students back, students who had left without a credential or a degree, which is a big population. And they've announced that they will forgive the debt of any student who owed them money who returns to the college. And I think that that's a wonderful way to re-engage the population of students who may have left because they owed $500 or $200 and didn't have a way to pay it. By forgiving the debt, I think it brings students back to the institution. But the other thing it does is it generates another revenue for the institution, because you gave up $500, but maybe you'll collect tuition on that student for 3 semesters. And I think financially, if you think of it that way, I think it's a smart. They estimate that it's around $17.7 million of all of those students' return that they would have to forgive. But the institution in the end will be better off because they'll have tuition and hopefully completion for those students who end up returning to the school.
Yeah, we've also relaxed a lot of the regulations around registration because of pending payments, and also creating incentives for students who haven't enrolled in last 3 semesters and are within 10 to 15 credits of finishing, and trying to get them back. And there has been tremendous amount of success with regard to those incentives. So I agree with Lee that is a tremendous rate of return on those efforts.
I'll say one other thing I was just going to add is that we know that the way that FAFSA currently is being filed is prior, so it's income 2 years ago. And we know that, there's an incredible amount of income has changed or have lost income due to this. And so I would say, I would urge institutions to use that professional judgment or to gather additional information to be able to zero out or to adjust people's expected family contribution, especially adult students who may be returning, who no longer have income, but have all of this additional responsibility to address, one of their biggest concerns, which is cost.
Absolutely. And by the way, Will, thanks for pointing out the Strata surveys, because these are rolling. I think they're doing it weekly or very regularly. And it's an incredible data source to see where adults are and young people as well in terms of thinking about college right now. So it's very accessible and well put together. Let me stick on this issue and turn to you, Lee, on the affordability, because I understand that Pima has a pretty impressive strategy on using ability to benefit as an on-ramp tool for low-skilled adults. So it kind of goes along with some of what we were just hearing about being creative with FAFSA, with professional judgment and such. Tell us a little bit about your strategy with ability to benefit.
So just so everybody's aware, so I was a president of Shoreline Community College before moving down to Tucson, Arizona to become the chancellor of the Pima district. And while I was in Shoreline, the state of Washington created the IBEST program, the Integrated Basic Education Skills Training Program. So when folks knew I was going to be coming to Pima, my adult ed team said, we'd like to incorporate that into what we're doing. And so, as you know, I came in right around 2013. As you know, just before that, Congress had suspended the use of ability to benefit. But not too long after that, successfully, community colleges advocated and pushed back, and that got reinstated. So it timed very nicely with the ability to be able to offer those funds to students who go into these career track programs who have not yet received their high school equivalency. So we paired IBEST, ability to benefit, with some of our high wage, high demand program areas. And so you brought all that together, and it's been phenomenal to see the outcomes. Students are graduating, 75% of our students are doing well coming through those programs. They're getting their high school equivalency as well as getting their post-secondary credentials, and also getting jobs as part of that. So we're very excited about the positive aspects of that. We're also working with the state to create what we call the high school equivalency plus career readiness pathways, as well as a concurrent pathway for adults. So not only folks coming through the K-12 system, but also students who have already dropped out of that system, and so providing both to get back into college. So you're seeing a lot of positive pieces coming from that effort. But really, it was really taking existing innovations, recombining them, and into a new way of thinking, and then following that success as we move forward. And that's essentially what our ATB has been about.
Excellent, thank you, Lee. So there's a question that's come in from the audience, and there's a few variations on this theme, so I wanted to pose it to all of you. With all the shift to moving instruction online, obviously, that whether it remains that, for how long it remains that way or not. Question is, what are you doing to convince prospective students that the quality of the educational experience is of sufficiently high caliber when done virtually? And B, then what are you doing to make sure that you deliver on that quality standard and the actual execution of those programs? So there's a lot wrapped up in there, and I'm sure you've been grappling with it since the spring. But now that you have sort of spring experience, you're having some summer experiences, and maybe looking toward the fall. Who wants to address this issue of quality and how you convince students that the quality is there and that it's worth paying for?
Yeah, maybe I can take a crack at it. It's absolutely true that initially, when we moved within a span of 2 weeks, everything to a remote environment, there was obviously a quality-quantity trade-off there. But I think getting ready for summer and fall, we had little more lead time. And so we have to make very strategic investments in our colleges and universities in training faculty as more and more of them get involved in offering online classes. And Lee earlier made a distinction between online classes where there are some long-standing metrics like quality matters and other elements which come into play, where some accountability framework and quality assurance can be built in, and the engagement with the students can be robust, and sometimes more robust than you will have in a face-to-face environment. Some of the research is showing that too. But then this pandemic has also increased many of our classes and courses to what we call hybrid or high flex. That is, where some component of the class is offered online, and other component cannot be offered online and is offered face-to-face. And so essentially what is happening here is that at least for summer and fall, what we were moving is, from spring, it was a totally online environment or almost totally online environment, to what we we can refer to as low residency environment, in which we are creating a framework in which student has to be on campus for as minimal a time as possible, because given the safety protocols of social distancing and other elements, we can't bring all our students at the same time. In fact, given a particular physical infrastructure at any given point in time, we could only bring in maybe 30% to 40% of the students. So that's why if you look at our mix is, for example, in fall, there are about 50% of the classes which are completely online. There are about 30% of the classes which would be face-to-face, and the other 20% or 25% is somewhere in that range are the classes which would be what we call high flex.
Thank you.
No, I think, building off of what Devinder is saying, so when we had to make that initial transition to virtual, our faculty, the majority of them were not trained and educated to teach in that environment. And so one of the strategies that we did just in that short period of time was to get them into a professional development program, to get them more exposed to using D2L. We use D2L as our online platform. And then what we've done this summer, and this is why I bring this up now, is we made a decision to go almost exclusively online for the fall. Why that's important is we can now prepare our faculty for that reality, that they are going to be teaching in this modality so that we can improve the quality experience for our students. We only are going to be able to do that by preparing our faculty to experience that environment. So that was one of the key reasons for making that call as early as possible. I think another important piece is we're working with students to help them understand that environment as well. And so a lot of we're in fact going to be calling every student that we know who was a student in the spring who could continue in the fall, as well as new students who have expressed an interest in coming to Pima, and to help them, prepare them for that new reality of online. Now here's an important piece. Pima Online, separate from our virtual piece, was doing very well. Students who go through Pima Online have a very positive experience. So why I bring that up is we know that online can be high quality. We just need to invest in the faculty's development into that space, and then help the learners start to not be afraid of going into that environment. I think there's a natural hesitation that it's not as good as. Some of that we've created for ourselves because we've said it's not as good as. Well, is that really true? When you peel back, is that really true? And I would challenge anyone who would say that it's not as good. But you do have to invest more time into the quality. The other thing we're going to be doing going forward, we're not going to hire you as a faculty member if you can't teach online. I think a faculty member's relevancy into the future is their ability to teach in multiple modalities. If they don't bring that skill set on the front end, that's going to compromise their ability to be employable and as they go through the future. Now, for existing faculty, or if you say to us you're willing to learn this, then we'll invest in you. So I just want you to know that we're seeing there's going to be a shift here. It's already happening. And here's the new reality. And I know there's a question, we're going to talk more about this, so I'll stop there.
No, really helpful. Very, very salient points you're raising. Will, do you want to jump in at all about this issue of how you communicate and reach the learners to convince them that, like you mentioned earlier, concerns about particularly underrepresented students stopping out or never starting, and anxieties, and maybe some of it has to do with concerns that they're not going to get the quality that they need. I know there are other concerns. Any thoughts on strategies here?
Well, just say really quickly that we know from some national surveys that recently came out that most students were not satisfied with the quality of instruction they received this past fall. I think it was like somewhere near 59% of students said they were satisfied or very satisfied pre-COVID, and only 19% said they were satisfied post-COVID. And so you have, this dramatic distinction of what students were experiencing in the classroom. I think that colleges have a lot of work to do in terms of providing faculty. I love the faculty, but providing them with professional development Faculty are taught to be an expert in a given field. They're not taught how to teach, how to deliver instruction, pedagogy, how to measure learning outcomes. And so I think that we have a long way to go in faculty preparation so that we're not only teaching future faculty members how to be effective researchers or experts in content, but also how to be effective teachers. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done in professional development. I know it was hard to move that quickly, but students said that their experience changed when instruction was well designed and well delivered. And so we have to think about course design, and we have to think about course delivery and engagement to ensure that we're reaching students and delivering them with a quality product.
Well said. Thank you. So we're nearing the end, and sorry I didn't get to all the online questions, but we have a couple minutes left. I thought if you could each have 30 seconds, or I'd love to get final pieces of advice you might have, and also if there's anything you want to indicate you think is here to stay. You don't have to go into detail. Anything that's changing now that you think is just going to be enduring, and that you want to flag that so that we can maybe come back to it at another time as kind of a lasting practice change based on what's happening now with this pandemic. Final thoughts?
So I'll share these two pieces, and they're interrelated. About 10 years ago, and I share this in the article, I met with a group of Hyundai executives. They said to me then, if it can be done online, it will be done online. That's 10 years ago. Now fast forward to our new reality. I think this will be part of the mix. If you're not looking to integrate online into your future programming, whether it's in a hybrid model, you will become less and less relevant in the future. The other thing is a Wayne Gretzky quote: skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck has been or at. And that's where higher ed has to come to a new reality. We must adapt to Industry 4.0, the 4 superpowers. We have to step up and really deal with social injustice. We must close the equity gaps, and we must take seriously, once and for all, racial justice. So I just leave those two pieces for everybody. And that's going to be daunting work, as you can imagine.
Thank you, Lee. Devinder, real quick, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the post-COVID-19 world, we are not going to get back to where we were in pre-COVID-19. So in the post-COVID-19, we'll ask for, in order to impart greater flexibility and adaptability, much more investments, strategic investments in technology, and fully understand the role of technology in education. And secondly, it'll also require much more investments in faculty professional development, to Lee's point, where they can quick between modalities quickly. And lastly, the workforce itself will change very dramatically, and the work will change very dramatically. And we have to understand how those changes occur and then bring them back to raise the relevancy quotient of our programming, academic programming.
Excellent points. Thank you, Devinder. Will, final thoughts?
Just really quick, I think that we know that equity gaps existed, like Lee said, pre-COVID. If we're not careful in terms of how we deliver instruction, how we award financial aid, how we assign students to technology, post-COVID, those gaps are going to grow and not going to shrink. And so I think that at the institution level, at the state level, and at the federal level, we need to pay attention to how we're funding and how we're delivering resources to ensure that those that are the most vulnerable get what they need in order to be able to participate in the changing economy. Well
said. Super important. We all have responsibility for that, and I really appreciate you raising that, Will. Well, thanks to Will, Lee, and Devinder. Thank you for spending the hour with us. I just want to remind everyone that a recording will be available and posted on the ESG website if you want to share. And also the next in our series of webinars with ACCT and SHIO will be on July 29th at 2 p.m. Very important topic, improving online education, something we already spent some time on today. So without further ado, I want to wish everyone a good afternoon. Many thanks to the panelists. Keep up the great work and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.